Hello and welcome back to Absurdity. I'm Ryan Becker and I am joined by my dashing co-host, Henry Johnson.
Oh, I can't handle this much flattery.
Well, it's only once a week, so don't. That worries me for how little flattery you get outside of this context.
I'm in ministry, which means you get very little flattery.
That's actually, yep, that's true. You are somehow never enough, and yet the only person who can do the thing. And yet you never do it, but you never do it correctly, according to people who don't do your job.
Correct.
Yeah, so, reasonable. Sounds like just a normal working job.
You're either never enough or you're so good you end up flaming out as some sort of mega church pastor that takes advantage of women or money or both or whatever.
Yeah, basically, essentially.
Because you think you're entitled to it all.
Yeah, it's very, or the other end of that is you're so good at what you do, and what you do is actually like you go into a broken church or like a really small damaged church or controversy, whatever, and you build that church back up, and now you become known as basically the trauma surgeon pastor, and you only end up working with churches that are in that situation, and so you never actually get to work with a fully healthy, functional church.
Why are you talking about my ministry?
I think, see? Because mine was on that same track. That's why. Just part of life. So, this is a great episode to talk about this, given last week's episode, Driving While Black with Anthony Carter, which if you have not listened to,
you need to listen to it.
Yeah. And go watch it because it's on YouTube. We are on my YouTube channel. We are trying to do all video episodes as well from now on. And so, yeah, you can actually go see that interview live and watch my camera die every 10 minutes.
Which might be a good time to mention, if you want to not see his camera die every 10 minutes, head on over to Patreon and we appreciate your support, whatever that might be. All right, back to your original point.
Amen. If you haven't checked that out, go check it out. It's a really poignant episode where Anthony, who's a police chaplain, a black police chaplain who shares his experiences, actually his first experience with racial profiling, and he shares what it's like to now be a father who's now teaching his daughters to drive. And it was interesting because there was actually a YouTube comment on this from someone who has watched a lot of my videos, and I'm very grateful for. And it's very easy to watch that interview, I think, and potentially walk away with thinking that we were excusing the actions of cops or being sympathizers in any way, shape, or form. And while we are sympathetic to good cops, I do want to bring a clarification just in case there's anyone else out there who might walk away with this, which is that the only police officers that Anthony defended in that interview were the police officers that he knows personally and that he has seen work. In other words, he didn't defend a single cop outside of those that he could really actually verify, like they're in this to do good and to serve the community and protect the community. Those are the only people that he defended. And anyone else, it's not that he had just outright attacked, but he wasn't going to give anyone just the pure benefit of the doubt. There was not that level of sympathizing going on. So just wanted to bring that.
And we recognize that we live in a super polarized world right now, and that these issues are emotionally charged. And so that's part of the risk we take in engaging with them. But we would like to encourage all of our listeners and even non-listeners. We need to learn listening skills. That doesn't mean we agree. But we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should probably listen twice as much to make sure we get a sense of what somebody is saying before immediately just going haywire. And once you get a sense of it, if you still don't like it, that's your right, and we're not saying that you shouldn't. We're not saying immediately support it because we talked about it, but just give us a little bit of grace as we talk through these issues, and give us some more grace today because
it only gets worse from here.
Cheer up, it gets worse.
So, well, I find it funny, too, that podcasters would say, listen twice as much as you speak while we're on a podcast where we talk for an hour. I just think that's funny. But I agree with you 100%. And there are times where you listen enough and you still find out that what we say is problematic, in which case that's what I'm saying. Please keep commenting when you encounter something that you are, that feels controversial or that you're, really wrestling with or grappling with. If there's something that rubbed you the wrong way, there's a complete realistic chance that we said something incorrectly. or that we approach something in a way that we should not have approached. And that's the difficulty of being a podcast where we're trying to navigate these conversations, is that you're watching us navigate them, which means that we could get it wrong. And in those moments, we do want to apologize and we do want to be shown the error so that we can make it right. That's really important to us. So just something to put out there too. But today we're talking two things simultaneous because they happened simultaneously.
Or near simultaneously.
Yeah, or near simultaneously, which is the Derek Chauvin trial and the Ma'khia Bryant shooting in Columbus. Now, I know there are other shootings that are being talked about. Andrew Brown in North Carolina. That's a big one right now. And
seems to be a new shooting every other day to talk about.
Unfortunately. And I think we'll get to a lot of them. I think sometimes we don't talk about these things, not because we don't want to, but it almost feels like, what else do we say when this keeps happening time and time again? Like it's and I get that we're not the only ones who experience that frustration, but that's sometimes why we don't jump on a topic immediately. It's because we're trying to figure out what we can add to the conversation or what framework we can take it. And obviously we're prefacing all this by saying we're two white guys talking about this. So it's going to color that conversation in one way, shape, or form, no matter what we do.
Right. And this is going to be an interesting too, because we're going to discuss two interrelated issues, one in which, in theory, all of the evidence has now been presented because a trial has actually taken place. And unlike most trials, which aren't televised or you don't necessarily have access to all the material, this was actually one of the first I think the first trial in Minnesota history for sure that had been broadcast. And so we could watch to a certain extent. Obviously, some witnesses, they didn't turn the cameras on and whatnot. But we got to hear the evidence presented as if we were sitting in the courtroom if you chose to take the time to do that. So in one sense, this is one of the few issues that we probably have discussed, to be fair, that a plethora of evidence was brought by both sides. In other words, what they thought was the most important stuff to bring, they brought because it's a trial.
Yep.
So that's been heard, and it's rare that let's be honest, it's rare that we get to talk about things where that much evidence and research has been done by people that have a vested interest in doing it. Because most of us say, well, I have an interest because of the topic, but you're not about to go to jail. So, so in one sense, that issue, we probably have a lot more detail than anything else we've been able to discuss. And on the other one, we have some video evidence that, as we'll get into, that's going to be a doozy, because yes, we don't technically have all of the evidence yet, but from what you see, it's so we get to talk about perceptions again, perspectives, and again the maddening craziness of all of this. So that's what we get to dive into today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a good place to start is the Chauvin trial. I think we've touched on it a couple times where we've mentioned and alluded to the fact that, like everyone expected, the basic defense was, we're going to put George Floyd on trial, very much trying to prove he was a criminal or that he died of other reasons. And which, I get it, in a position like this where you really don't have that much of a defense, you've got to come up with something. I just hate that it's always character assassination.
I was going to say, well, it's like ad hominem arguments. It's used even outside of the courtroom. If I can't win, I'll be like, well, you're just ugly or you're dumb. All right. And as soon as you can start fighting, there is something to be said that it always seems to be the case in trials with police officers that you assault the character. Well, this person had a history of whatever, and therefore nothing wrong with this person. The thing that stood out to me most was, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, the defense or the prosecution took 11 days to present their case, and the defense took like 2.
Yep.
Which isn't necessarily evidence. I know some people are like, well, that's kind of pushing it. What if it's so clear that the defense is right, you can do it in 2 days? Well, okay, maybe, but it's just a disparity. And there was like 400 witnesses on one side and like 8 on the other. Again, that's not always a testament to the strength of an argument, but
yeah, the other issue is, there was a lot of people out that were presenting an emotional case, and I think there was some of that from the prosecution. But I think what they were trying to paint was a picture of, like, there is no one there reasonably that day, whether it was the doctors who first worked with him, other police or other people on site, bystanders. There's not a single person there that had the impression that he was dying for any other reason. And drug and toxicology reports and autopsies pretty much revealed the same. And so I think this one was more of kind of a closer to an open and shut one but it just speaks to how much work in something that seems so, for lack of a better phrase, black and white almost. It just speaks to how hard it is to find justice and accountability in these matters when it took 11 days of evidence being presented and we were all still on edge regarding what the verdict and outcome would actually be.
Right. I mean, to find a little bit of hope, it does encourage me somewhat. And I say this as one who knows that the system is broken, but it does. Let me not say but. When you say but, you can discount the right. The system is broken. That
Yes.
being said, I found encouragement in the fact that a multi-racial jury that did have more Caucasian members on it than African American, and there's a whole bunch of debate we could have about how jury selection is done, but that it didn't take them more than 10 hours to come to a unanimous decision. And these trials have to be a jury. If you understand how juries work, it has to be unanimous for them to convict you on something. Else they don't convict you on that particular charge, or if they can't agree on anything, it becomes a mistrial, is what they call it. So they throw it out and go, well, nobody did good enough job to convince these people. But it only took them 10 hours to come to a unanimous decision. And, I'm tipping my hand already at the beginning of the conversation. I do believe it was the right one, given the options they were presented. And so that does give me a little bit of hope that a group of individuals could sit there and have to traumatically relive all of that. And at the end of the day, they went, yeah, this is pretty clear to us too. So, I mean, that's getting ahead of it. I can remember I heard the verdict live. I was driving a considerable drive back from an appointment I had to keep. And I remember I had the satellite radio on because they had been and this was on the day of the verdict, and they had just announced that the jury came back and handed the verdict to the judge and that he was going to make an announcement within the next hour. Of course, it took him an hour and a half to make it, but that's beside the point. I should have known better. So I stopped listening to what I was listening to and switched over to the radio. I was like, okay, I'm going to wait. I'm going to listen to this thing. And so I just kept listening to commentators for an hour, which I hated because I was waiting for them to interrupt this program. Here comes the guy to read the verdict. And I remember when he finally came out and read it, and I'm not going to say that I watched the whole trial like bated breath. I wasn't following it to that closeness the whole time. But I remember getting choked up a little bit when it came. I was kind of I don't know, it was just the emotion of the moment where you felt like this is something important that's going to happen. And a lot of people are riding on it. And that uncertainty of how are they going to go and what happens depending on how they go. Especially having lived through a year of protest and violence and riots and on both sides, I'm not trying to say just on one side or the other. And she was just like, how's this going to go? And then to hear it just come back unanimous on all three counts. And you were just like, wow. Okay. It was, I will remember that moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it is a watershed moment in some respects. I think just given how this has all played out over the last year with the protests as well, I really do think it's a watershed moment. However, and I remember feeling very similarly when I found out. I didn't find out from hearing an announcement. I found out just through Reddit when I had a chance to look, because I have been, full disclosure, I've been so overwhelmed and busy at work. I've barely had time for social media or looking at things. And anyone who knows me that knows I've actually been more active on Instagram this month. That's because I actually pay someone to manage my Instagram now. Because I am trying to put out more content. And so I banked up a whole bunch, and then that was all posted over time, but I made it before it was posted. And I really have been so busy that it's been harder for me to keep up with some of this stuff, which I really do feel bad about, but I have tried my best. And I think one of the things that, so when I look at this on Reddit, when I look at this on Twitter, I love Twitter because I can see a lot of different reactions and I can gauge kind of what a lot of the different conversations are. And no, I don't just, go to trending and look at the initial tweets. I actually try to dive into a lot of replies, and I really do try and read as many different perspectives as I can find. I try to see, hey, what is someone, I bet you there's someone who disagrees with this in the replies. I want to see what they
all
say.
All you have to do is move from top tweet to latest tweet.
Yeah, exactly.
Whole slew of stuff.
And so I'm not just saying I look something up for 2 seconds and then that's it. And I also am not going to say that I have like the highest journalistic integrity in my research either. I'm on Twitter. But there is a there is something to be said about like I'm going because I want to know what the conversation is, not just what the news is. And one thing that I was reminded of in the research for this was the Daniel Shaver incident. And for anyone who doesn't remember this, I think it was 2016 where Daniel Shaver was, early 2016. Daniel Shaver, if anyone remembers this video, it was a white dude in a hotel hallway on his knees, arms up, cops yelling at him, telling him, do not move your hands to the small of your back, do not move your hands towards your waist, do not move your hands toward anywhere, or we will shoot you. He's on his knees and they tell him to crawl. And he's scared to death. They are like screaming at this dude. And in the full video, there's actually conflicting instructions given between the two police officers. And in this moment, they tell him to crawl. So he falls forward onto his hands. And I think what happens is, because he falls forward, his shirt kind of falls forward. And instinctually, every single one of us, when your shirt falls forward, you go to, yep. And so they shot him. Almost as soon as he gets on to all fours, they shoot him and he dies. 26-year-old white dude in a hallway in an Arizona hotel. The officer who shot...
Not the craziest thing that's happened in an Arizona hotel.
Correct. And the officer that shot him, Philip Brailsford, at 28 years old, he was fired. He was charged with murder in 2017. He was charged with murder in 2016. He was acquitted at trial in 2017 for this, by the way, which this is one of those that I disagree. Almost 100% I disagree with this decision. But here's the kicker. He was briefly rehired by his police department in 2018 for 42 days so that at 28 he could apply for a lifetime pension for medical and retire medically. So the police and he got it. And that's the kind of thing where a lot of people are saying, okay, so yes, we got accountability here. They wouldn't necessarily call it justice. And I can understand that perspective too.
And they still lessened the blow.
Yeah, but they did still soften the blow. And I don't know if we've done sentencing yet. I haven't looked at that. I didn't have a chance before we hit record to look if we had gotten to sentencing yet. But I think basically all of this is to say, don't stop watching this, because we still need to see the discipline and punishment carried out, the consequences carried out. And it is interesting to see what happens when the police eyes or when the public's eyes are no longer on the situation.
Yeah, that's the problem with for me when people call something a watershed vote or a watershed trial or whatever, is when you think of a watershed, obviously a watershed is an area where all the water in the area is running into. It's like a water basin kind of thing. I start thinking of water. And the thing is, a watershed is only good if water's still running into it. If nothing's running into it, you just have a dry water basin at the end of it. So they go, oh, it's a watershed moment. Well, yeah, because all of the protest, all of the media, all of the social media, everything was flowing a lot of material into this watershed. And so it filled up and they're like, wow, we have this lake of placid justice. Well, what happens when we go, ta-da, we filled the lake, and you cut off all the sources of water going into it? It's going to turn into a dead swamp and then eventually into a dry, cracked pit. And so, yeah, okay, so we've got one. So that's one trial of accountability that, to be fair, I do agree with the governor of Minnesota on this, where I think he said if that video had not been filmed, there would not have been an officer going to jail, period.
Correct. 100%. Because what was the original headline? Like a medical incident after a medical incident or something like that?
It wasn't the headline. It was what they put in the report that they filed.
That's what it was.
Medical incident while undergoing arrest or whatever. And I mean, nondescript. I think the court got him for that too, because they were obfuscating information about what happened. But yeah, it would have just gone to medical incident. Cop was there. Cops know, we're done, which tends to be how it goes. But instead, someone had the courage or the forethought to pull out the phone and film for like 12 minutes to catch the 9 minutes and how many ever seconds, I'm bad with math here, that he just knelt on his neck, and to catch him saying such callous things is like, what? You weren't here? I mean, he's a big dude. We've got to deal with him. He'd be riotous or however exact. I can't remember the exact phrase he used, but one of the people standing there pleading with the officer was like, why don't you stop? And he was just kind of nonchalant, like, I got to do this. The guy's like a whole threat and whatever.
Yeah.
Even after he's not been moving for multiple minutes. So
yeah, and that's different from there's a different situation that got in that started making the rounds on social media too of another scenario where officers were on someone's neck, and this one is that one's a lot more gray than the George Floyd one was, because you can hear the officers throughout the entire thing on the two or three different body cam footages that were released. They were dealing with either someone who had some mental issues or was just drunk beyond recognition, one of the two. And essentially, it was very clear he couldn't comprehend what police were saying. And I'm going to try and find it, and I'll reference it a little bit later. But essentially, you can hear the officers the entire time talking about whether what they're doing is justified or warranted. And even when they pin him, the second that they realize that he's either totally, like, he's basically, the second that they realize he's unresponsive or gone a little bit, not necessarily limp, but you know what I mean, where he stopped struggling and really fighting back with this, that's when they immediately turn him over and begin working on first aid and trying to resuscitate.
There was
like,
active
it's a different
interest in what is
correct.
The situation that the guy is going through. And not to sound like, here we go again to get the YouTube comments, like, so you're defending cops. Like, I know of cases personally where people have been like tasered 5 or 6 times, and sometimes drugs and other stuff will make people it's crazy what adrenaline and other things will do. And I get
tasers only work like 50% of the time or something like that. And
yeah,
actually
yeah, and it's crazy. So I get that there's certain situations that officers need to do stuff, but like you said, when you can see body cam footage where they're actively like, okay, are we still in the right doing this? Is this still necessary? Is this, when they're actively aware versus a 12-minute video that shows a guy just callously kneeling there and being like, when people are calling out to him, not even being like, well, look, I just checked him. He's got a pulse. He's fine. No, he just kneels there and it's like, mind your own business, you know, and doesn't do anything. You're just kind of like, wait, what?
And his pride was in there somewhere, because I can, and here's what I mean by that. Like, someone's like, duh, but here's what I mean by that, because there have been moments even where I lead a group of college students, and I can think of moments even in the last couple of years that I've been doing the role that I'm in, or that I've worked with people younger than me in any capacity, or if I've just been in charge and someone's come to me and told me, hey, what you're doing isn't correct, or you need to like change course here, or, just ask me to stop doing something. And in my pride, I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to give them the ammunition to say, hey, you were wrong this time. How do we trust you now in a future event, or, any of that. And so I would double down on the wrong thing just because I didn't want them to know that I was, to have any ammo against me to say I was wrong. And
we all do that, but isn't there a certain
that's what
point
I'm saying.
where, and maybe this is me talking about pride though, isn't there a certain point where you then at that point start secretly trying to figure out how to mitigate if you're wrong? Like, that would be where in my pride, I would be kind of like gently reaching down to feel for a pulse or something, like, shifting my knee slightly.
Well, no, I mean, that's you. But you're also dealing with a cop here who sat there for 9 minutes on someone's,
I get that. I'm just saying that's part of the egregious nature, I think, why they did manslaughter charges as well, is there was no even attempt at normal, like,
correct.
Well, maybe just, no, it's my pride. And then he light shift and I'm still going to look right. But no, he was just like, screw off. Or that was the appearance anyway.
And here's the hard thing too, is the body cam footage really does make a huge difference. And I'm always going to be a advocate for increased body cam footage, increased, all of that, because
especially when it's on. Yes.
Yeah. I just think it's so important now, to have that and to have public accountability for public servants. I mean, there's just no way around that. I think that's kind of necessary at this point. And this is one of those situations where I really hate that if you have nothing to hide, you would have no problem with it. I really hate that argument typically, because freedom of privacy is a big important thing. But when you are working a public servant job, that already we've seen countless evidences for, and moments where injustice has been taken or has happened, and body cam footage has helped to correct that, um, as much as correcting it can be done anyway. That's where, in my mind, I'm like, you're working for the public, you have public accountability, and if you don't want to be recorded, I don't know what to tell you, because this is a job that like, the recording in my mind protects the police officer as much as it protects in the event that the police officer does something right, it protects the police officer more at the same level that it protects the public. And even as pastors, Henry and I know this, because when you're dealing with church policy, working with your church, policy can be both your biggest enemy and your best friend. Any skilled politician knows this too. Like, it can work against you, and man, when it works for you, wow. It's one of those things where accountability makes a huge difference and really does work to serve everyone involved as much as it can anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, kind of like the old adage that the mind may forget, but paper doesn't. Now, of course, people can say, yeah, but you can put a lie on paper. Well, I mean, I get it, but evidence in a all things being equal setting is your friend.
Yes.
Unless you were doing something that the evidence says is pretty bad.
Yeah. Which, in what we've seen, I can say the Andrew Brown case, for example, is one where that's not probably so much the case. Evidence is the other way around. Derek Chauvin, once again, same thing. I do see it as accountability, not justice. I do see, and I want to see that continue to be carried out. I do wish and hope that in future cases where this happens, because unfortunately there are going to be future cases where this happens.
And not every single one of them is going to have somebody filming for 12 minutes.
Correct. I'm really hoping that we can move away from the character assassination stuff, and I don't know how to get there, but we need to get there. That being said, I also think Derek Chauvin needed defense. And I think he needed...
he has a right to it.
He has a right to it, and there's a reason for that. And the reason being, not because his actions were defensible, but defense attorneys, a lot of people ask of defense attorneys, how can you defend someone who you know is guilty? And
because we don't want mob rule.
Correct. A good defense attorney is not necessarily there to prove that someone that was guilty is innocent, but rather it's to hold the justice system accountable to make sure that proper levels of justice are actually carried out. And if evidence was dropped
but they
along
might
the
not
chain
be
of
guilty
custody,
enough to be killed. It depends.
Correct. Yeah. So that's what they're there for. Now, do all of them do it that well? No. Do all of them do it for that reason? No.
No.
And there are times where, and this is why accountability is so important, because there are times where guilty people have gotten off on technicalities in the law because someone somewhere dropped the ball. And that's why accountability is so important. So the ball doesn't get dropped, so the proper people do go away. And so at the same time, I'm happy for the verdict. Chauvin needed a defense, and I think that there's a reason that's a right. And I am glad that I'm glad at the verdict that was made, and that was reached. Sorry. So any thoughts there before we transition to the next piece of this?
Well, no, I would agree with you. For all of its faults, I do appreciate still that we have a system that demands a trial. Now, you can be upset at how many don't go to trial and the injustice there, but once you get to a trial situation, I'm very thankful to live in a country where it's not ruled by mob or ruled by public opinion. And sometimes you're right, public opinion is right. Sometimes you can see the evidence and maybe the majority's there, but you also have to remember that even a dead fish can go with the flow. And we don't want to live in a place where people just get steamrolled for being right or for being wrong, right? There needs to be that weighing of it. And I know sometimes the justice system is frustrating how slow it is. And there's something to be said about not having enough, case loads spread out, enough judges and enough, fine. I think there's things that can be tweaked about the system for sure and need to be. But I am thankful. I mean, part of what took it a little while to get underway is not just that they didn't have all this evidence and video, but they had to find peers that weren't already prejudiced against hearing the narrative. And that takes time, especially when it's a big public trial like this and everybody has seen footage
Yep.
and whatever. And I do know there's going to be an appeal coming about that too, because they always try
There
and
was
take
some
that technicality.
intimidation. There was some.
Yeah, and that these people are going to know. And of course, they know if they judge a certain way, they're going to get mobbed in the street. And okay. But I mean, they took mitigation for that. We never saw or knew who these jurors were unless now some of them are trying to come out, but that's their choice. They make that choice. They didn't have to be publicly known, and a lot of them probably never will be. But, to that end, I just want to say I appreciate the system trying. It still has a lot of work that needs being done in it, but it still on occasion can manage to work. And I know that's of little hope to people where they feel like it's failed them. But it's something that I'm glad we invest in and still needs to be invested in. So, and in this case, I think did a good job.
That's why I really hate the narrative of like government, politicians only want this, or, government only does this or whatever. And I'm sitting here like, yes, I know that there's oligarchy claims, there's money in politics and corporations in politics too. But like at the end of the day, we do elect our officials, and the government's job is to work for the people, which means that if they're not working for the people, we vote them out. And I know that that's a really reductionist way of looking at that. Don't get me wrong.
And then there's the irony that when you ask people, everybody hates Congress, but everybody loves their congressman. So everybody keeps revoting the same people back in, and they wonder why it never changes.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, the idea being like, oh, well, we can't trust government to do this, or we can't trust government to do that. And I'm like, well, we elect them.
It's a reflection of your priorities.
If we can't trust them, then let's get people in that we can trust, and let's make we can't trust the government to fix public education. Well, then let's put in people
that does.
That does, and that we can trust to do that.
And people are like, well, I don't like the choices. Well, then find a choice you like, or run yourself, or do whatever. Our
get
system
involved.
Still works that way.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so that's all I'm going to say there, and we're gonna move on here because this is the simultaneous thing, or somewhat simultaneous thing that happened on April
Now we move
20.
a couple states over around the Great Lakes.
Yes, to Columbus, Ohio, with the Ma'khia Bryant shooting.
That's
that happened
only about 30 minutes from where my folks live. So interestingly enough, my parents are in the area.
And that one, this is where we either make enemies, make friends. I have no idea what Henry's response to this is. I have no idea. Like, I know what mine is.
And to be fair, I'm glad we just talked about the justice system ahead of time. And yes, even this deserves a trial.
Yes. But I'm going to open on a pretty, well, first let's just say this. April 20, someone calls the police from a house saying that there's girls out trying to stab us with a knife and trying to attack us.
Surprise, it wasn't a pot story.
Yeah, exactly.
420.
And the police arrive on scene, and what ends up happening, I'm not going into the body cam footage yet. I'm just going into, like, if you heard the news article, this is what you'd get, which is basically police arrive on scene, and a few minutes later, if that, they shoot Ma'khia Bryant 4 times, and they killing her.
Now, is it they? It's really one officer that shot.
It's one officer that was there, correct. But that's what I'm saying. This is what you'd hear in a news story. And then there were stories about how Ma'khia Bryant was the one who actually called the police. There was another story out that's saying that when the police arrived on scene, Ma'khia Bryant actually went up, and she's 16 years old, by the way. She was 16 years old. Let's also put that into perspective. And when police arrive on scene, there was a story out that Ma'khia was approaching police to talk to them and tell them about the situation. However, the body cam footage paints a very different and more complex picture. And the body cam footage, this police officer arrives on scene, gets out of his car, and we're talking about everything that I'm about to say basically happens within a 20 to 30 second window. Like, there's not much time.
It talks about escalation training, but it also talks about, and I'm sure this is what trials and other things would bring out, what was the officer told when he was driving up.
And that's the problem
what
is
frame
we
of
don't
mind is
fully
he
know.
already in when he jumps out? Like, someone's going to get,
Yeah.
we
And that
don't
was
know.
something that Anthony brought up last week on the show was like, you don't know the hour, leading up to them showing up to a call. You don't know what was said to
Correct.
them, which you do know in the
Not an
911
excuse
call.
for behavior, but we're just saying there's a lot
Yes.
of details on this one we don't know, like the previous topic.
So when the officer arrives on scene, he's asking what's going on. And as he is asking that and trying to get a grip on the situation, he's saying, hey, everyone calm down. That's when Ma'khia was attacking one girl and the girl falls on her back. And then I guess Ma'khia's dad was standing there and goes to kick the girl that fell. And this is an important point for something that happens a little bit in a minute. And this is where the officer's like, stop, everyone stop. Stop right now. And then the officer he sees Ma'khia turn her back to the police officer and hold up another girl against a car who's dressed in this like pink tracksuit essentially. And the officer draws his weapon at that point, not pointing it at Ma'khia yet, and says, stop right now. I'm forgetting the exact words, but basically he's trying to stop it. And that's when Ma'khia swings her arm back and goes to as with the knife in that hand, and you can, in the hand that swung back to stab the girl, to swing it and stab at the girl who's up against the car. The officer at that point opens fire on Ma'khia, shooting her 4 times. And she collapses. The girl does not get stabbed, and the other officers there immediately, within a few seconds, are already getting down to try and provide treatment, medical treatment to her. And this is where the dad is saying, you shot my baby, you didn't need to shoot her, she's just a kid. That's why I say it's interesting that he says that, knowing that he was just kicking another kid. Granted, kicking is different than shooting, but like you were kicking at another kid and talking about
involved.
Yes. Yeah. The principle is a little off there. But that's why this is a little bit more, another body cam footage showed that the officer did try to de-escalate. He gets there, and when he walks up, this is right after he gets out of his car, there's a girl on the ground.
They know he's there.
Yeah, they know he's there, and he sees Ma'khia with her knife all the way back. In a hand, about to stab. And I know we talk about de-escalation all day long, but there really wasn't a chance by the time he arrived there for there to be de-escalation. And so this one I really struggle with, because if he and I have a question for you once I ask for your reaction to all of this too, because I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts on this, Henry. But like this one to me is so much more complex. No matter what, I agree with anyone who says she should not have been shot 4 times. That was excessive in my mind. But I don't know that I can claim. I don't know if I can be of the position that this is another completely unjustified and murderous moment against a person of color. I don't know. By the way, it hasn't been verified. There are claims from Ma'khia's family that Ma'khia was the one who called 911 originally
and was trying to defend herself. And
I haven't been able to find any sort of verification for that claim. So I don't know about that one. But yeah. So Henry, your thoughts on all of this? Anything that I got wrong there? Anything you want to say in this point?
I'm like you. The first thing we have to be honest with is this happened at a time of already heightened scrutiny to police violence against African Americans. So I try to, everyone thinks they're unbiased, but I try to keep this in my mind that there's a lot of other emotions all of us are feeling ahead of this happening. Now, you could say the callous comment like, it was just a bad time for that to happen. Well, it's always a bad time for someone to get shot.
Yeah, okay? It's never.
And let's not mitigate it at all. No matter if she was guilty or if she was trying to stab someone or not, you don't want someone dead at the end of the day. You do not.
Especially not a 16-year-old.
Especially not a 16-year-old. It's just like you said. So when you first watch it, this might sound weird. My first reaction was I just felt sorry for everybody in the video. Like you said, there was just too many things that just I was looking at. I was like, well, okay, first of all, I'm trying to imagine myself as an officer and seeing a knife fly back in your hand and you've already seen that person shoving someone up against a car. Now, I don't know. Again, we don't know all the details. I don't know if she was attacked first. I don't know if the other one had a knife. The point is, they didn't have the knife out at that moment. Maybe they did.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know.
No, all
We
you
only have
have is
body
that
cam
one
footage.
moment where the police officer walks up and this is the moment that he's in. There's no context to be taken in before that moment because
Correct.
this is the only thing that the cop knows. He doesn't know who, even if Ma'khia is the one who called 911 and was the one defending herself, in the moment that he walks up, he hasn't even been able to identify which one is Ma'khia. All he knows is there's someone with a knife attacking people. I don't know what other decision you make.
And the other adult in the situation is already beating up on a kid.
And taking the side of the person with the knife in this moment.
Here, the couple things that just stand out to me most, feeling sorry for everybody, is, and this is something for all of us to keep in mind, whether it's right or wrong or whatever. Knives, guns, everything, this is what we call force escalation. Whenever you introduce, a baseball bat could be that, depending on the situation. The moment you introduce something else into the situation, everything rises to the next level. And it comes a point where if nobody is interested in stopping this, you can't be surprised when it escalates beyond the point where, like this, somebody gets hurt or in this case, fatally killed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you start, I'm sure it started with an argument. I don't know. But everything always, you don't immediately just come out swinging. There's always something that predates it. So whatever happened, there was an altercation taking place. And whatever was going on escalated to the point that somebody thought the cops needed to get involved because they weren't stopping it. By the time cop shows up, and we don't know what was going on before that or how long this has been going, some sort of beatdown or pushing or something has been going on. Obviously, to the point where when he shows up, somebody's thrown on the ground, and now daddy adult is getting ready to join in on, I'm going to beat the snot out of this kid. Or, I don't know what he was thinking. We can't know that. But the point is now it's getting physical enough. People are losing balance and ending up on the ground, and people want to get kicked. Okay, that's already another escalation. When a knife comes out, and don't underestimate this, and I say not that I'm trained in knife fighting or anything, but people are like, well, it's just a knife opposed to a gun. Okay, that's like the argument, well, back then they used swords and arrows versus what all of these things are tools. I know this is an argument we can make about weapons. They're all tools, but it's why you use it. And she wasn't standing in the kitchen with a tomato in front of her.
Yeah.
Or any of the other people, right? This is the knife at that point ceases to be just a tool. It's now being used in a weapons capacity. Now you can argue whether she had a right, she was using it in self-defense or not. We don't know yet. We have no clue. But a weapon has now come out. Sure, it's a knife, and sure, it takes more effort than pulling a trigger on a firearm, which is a machine that will throw something at you pretty quick. But the point is now you just escalated again. And the other thing that's sad is the moment the officer pulled the gun, to be fair, it escalated another level.
Correct.
Because once you unholster a weapon, and this is something that, again, I've not had police training, but assuming their training has any sort of logical coherence with weapons training I have had to have in other areas of my life, I have always been taught that the moment you pull the firearm, you are in a whole new level of decision making, and you have better have made a lot of decisions before you pulled it. The moment it comes out of the holster, you're in a whole new ballgame. The time for decision making was before it came out because you just escalated the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because you cannot be willing to pull a firearm out of its holster and not use it in some way. So the moment he pulled it, now you're in critical decision seconds mode, right? Because he has a split amount of time, and that's something maybe to use against the officer or not. Again, we don't have all the details, but the moment I saw him pull it out, I was like, it's going to get used. That was just my gut feeling. The moment I saw it come, I was like, I know where this is going. Because the moment it comes out, you've got like 5 seconds or less for them to stop, drop a knife, do whatever. And instead, she got dropped. Right? She keeps going. And of course, it's out, and he used it. He fired 4 shots, and down she goes. And the problem, again, for her is this isn't just anybody with a gun. This is a guy that they are trained that when they shoot, they're not aiming for kneecaps and shoulder blades. And they're taught center of mass firing. Like the military, they're taught if you're going to use it, you're going to use it, and it's going to work. You're not taking chances. You're aiming. They're not aiming for like, well, it can cause the least damage. The moment they pull the trigger, it's to drop you. That's how they are trained.
Yeah.
And now we can argue if that's good, but that's how they're trained.
Well, and there's other ethical things around, shooting to maim, but I do find ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous claims of shooting, he could have shot the knife out of her hand or he could have
That's
shot
not how firearms work, folks.
Yeah, or it could have shot or should have shot her hand or her legs or just any other part of her body, or used a taser. And number one, tasers only work like 50% of the time, if that. Number two, you're half a second away from her literally stabbing this girl with a knife, and you think, well, the knife wasn't lethal.
Depending on where she hits.
There's a saying with knife fights, right? If two people are fighting with knives, both people die. The loser dies on scene, and the winner dies later in the hospital. That's kind of the saying behind knife fights. There's no. It's just in a very twisted logic. It's the same as a bullet. It's a metal object going into your body, causing damage in your tissue. Yep.
And depending on where the blade or the bullet hits is going to cause you a whole lot of problems.
Yep. And an officer does have a duty in those moments to stop a crime in progress. And regardless of what happened leading up to that point, that's what there was a crime in progress. There was an essentially attempted murder at that point. At least battery.
Again,
right?
Just going off of the evidence
murder.
we have.
Yes.
We don't have everything, and we're admitting that.
Correct. And that's what I'm saying. This is the body cam footage on this one is a lot less cut and dry in, leading up to that moment.
No pun intended.
Correct. Thank you. It's just so much. This one is it's really hard to not let your feelings get caught up and affected by what's happening with the Chauvin trial, what's happening with Andrew Brown in North Carolina, which I think we'll see is, I have the feeling that we'll see is another very, very unjustified one just based on what I know about it so far. And I think
this whole thing about this video is that it's very easy for both sides to have something to argue in their favor. Very easy.
And both Henry and I mourn the loss of another person of color to police in any capacity. But my thing is, I want to make sure that when we focus on issues of injustice, because of what we're up against when it comes to racial injustice and when it comes to anti-racism efforts, we have to make sure that we're taking the right stances at the right times. I don't have any other way to put this other than this is where I've talked about social media being a revolution, and this is where that revolution or causes another revolution. This is where I think that actually works against us, because this is where if body cam footage isn't released, so if body cam footage isn't released, the family can go up and say, well, she was going up or anyone, I'm not saying the family said this, but anyone could say, well, she was going up and she was trying to talk to police officers peacefully. And there's no is the answer to that. Like the body cam footage unequivocally is no, she was not going up to talk to police officers calmly about what the situation was.
No one's talking to the police officer in this video.
Until after the shots are fired. And this is where, once again, number one, in that moment, I can't believe you think that I can't believe anyone thinks that an officer, regardless of how skilled you are with a firearm, can just do that. I don't know how many movies you've seen of Wanted and
by the way, Hollywood is not where you should learn about firearms.
Correct.
None of that. For anybody that has owned a firearm or operated a firearm or is in the military and dealt with firearms or police, Hollywood has an idea where, they pull it out and they're just shooting and they're doing trick shots and whatnot. That's not how firearms work. You cannot do that with firearms. And even if you could, because I know there's Olympic trick shooting and things like that, they're using low calibers and they're also in an environment where no one's worried about dying, where your brain is not filled with endorphins and adrenaline and you're having to make a split-second decision.
But here's the other thing, and this is where the cop is in a damned if you do, damned if you don't. If he did try to shoot to maim, if he misses, guess who's on the other side?
Hit somebody else, yeah.
Well, he hits the girl that was imagine if he hits the girl that was about to be stabbed instead. I mean, or if he doesn't shoot at all and the girl gets stabbed.
Or what happens if he shoots and he doesn't hit anybody, but now angry dad that's already shown that he's willing to beat up kid goes, he's going to kill my girl, and comes lunging at him, and then does he get shot? I mean,
there's any
the moment
number
the gun
of ways
gets pulled,
this plays
somebody's
out.
dying.
And that's what's so sad to me. And I don't want to paint a whole bunch of what ifs here, but the idea being, at least in this split half-second moment where a cop has to make a decision, I can't say that I can, and I'm waiting to see what other evidence comes out, what else we find out about this situation. What I'm saying is, up to this moment, which is the same kind of judgment that I would have made with the George Floyd case, because for a while, all we had was body cam, right? Until autopsies and everything else came out, all we had was body cam. So going just off of body cam and what we know about the case, I have a hard time believing this fits the same bill. And I have a hard time believing that many of us weren't fully influenced by how we feel about the other verdict and other shootings that have happened along,
and several
around the
other
same time.
cases that had just happened around the same time that are clearly from their own body cam footage. Not nearly as gray. It's very clear that, like, wait a minute, you're pepper spraying a guy with his hands out the window in an army uniform.
Yep.
In the light.
Which is,
it's
why I'm so empathetic to people who are angry about this. Because why wouldn't you be? Given all of this happening, why wouldn't your first gut reaction, especially as a person of color, why wouldn't it be to sympathize with the person who was shot and killed in this moment, knowing what the stories are? Because as far as you're concerned, you see it on Twitter, you see it in your friend group, you see it on Facebook, wherever you see it, it's another Black person killed by police. And that headline on its own is going to elicit certain feelings, regardless of what the cause was.
Yeah. And especially when you've seen 90 other cases where someone who's white might have pulled a knife and they still would have yelled at him to drop it before they shot him. I get it.
And this is where in my mind, and also there's something said about the police bringing Burger King, I think it was to Dylan Roof, the shooter in South Carolina when he was in custody.
Murdered.
Yeah. And it turns
after
out
they have to hunt him down.
After they have to hunt him down,
they know
take
he's
him alive.
murdered 9 people already. So
as it turns out, this is. I found this out later about this. This is a complete aside, but it is relevant to some degree. They went to get him Burger King. I think it was him, but it was someone in recent. You can look this up. The reason they had to do it was because within a certain amount of time, you actually have to provide food and water to someone who's been arrested. There's laws about this, or else you have to let the person go, or else. Guess what? Someone dropped the ball in chain of custody, and now that can be argued as is it the cruel and unusual punishment argument?
Yeah.
And then he gets let off because of that technicality. And yes, that can happen. And so they had to, because they had nothing on site to give him, and so someone had to rush and get him food in order to actually make sure that justice was served. So
and I get that optics are horrible.
But what choice do you have if you want to make sure that the ball doesn't get dropped? Correct. And that's why for me, I fully empathize with anyone who is outraged and angry here. And I want to be honest. I really want to be, given everything that's happened. I don't blame really anyone for feeling the way that they do. I just, in this instance, me being honest and trying to navigate this stuff as we talk about it and as we experience it, I can't see this being the same level or warranting the same level of outrage when all is said and done as others. And I think that when we do invest a lot of our energy into things that can't be defensible from fully defensible when it's all said and done, we hurt our own cause. That being said, we do need better mental health training. We do need better
emotional well-being.
Emotional well-being training. We do need better better de-escalation training. We need more thorough and longer training for police officers. We need alternate funding, or funding for alternate ways of policing. And if you want to know exactly what I mean by that, I look up Cahoots, CAHOOTS, in I think it's Eugene, Oregon, and you will understand exactly. Yes,
in past podcasts.
Just look that up. That's what I want.
And this goes to responsibility and accountability too. And we're saying this on both sides. Imagine, just playing hypothetical, what if by the time all the evidence comes out, this officer, who I would hope regrets shooting her, is not happy at the end of his day, like, I had to do it, but I'm so happy they died. I mean, I would hope that's not the case, that he's not some callous whatever. I don't know this officer any more than I knew the girl that was shot. But my point is, let's say all the evidence comes out and the guy could have made a decision either way, and as best we can tell in a broken world, that's the best he could do. We can disagree with it, but at the end of the day, he wasn't out to murder anybody, and he doesn't get tried or whatever. And his consequences, he has to live with the knowledge that he murdered a 16-year-old. Whatever, which don't discount that. I'm just trying to imagine, I'm not a police officer, but if I actually killed somebody, even if it was in self-defense, or people go, yeah, you were justified in doing that, I don't think I'm going to be completely emotionally well in my mind for the rest of my life over that. But that's just me. But anyway, let's just say that's the case and he's off. The problem becomes if we don't have accountability, it's not going to be fair for him or others either. It's going to further their trauma because they just are going to judge him by all the 900 cases that weren't handled correctly with accountability. The point is for every, and I get the arguments on the other side. They go, yeah, but there's probably tons of people that get accused of being guilty that are innocent. Okay, yes, but if we had better accountability, you would have more space to get correct, trials and answers because people wouldn't have just watched 900 cases be handled inappropriately and without accountability. That flip side, that's the problem for this cop right now. This happened, which is already a bad situation, in an environment where so many have not been held accountable or things have been shady or information has been kept back that he now has a whole mountain of unaccountability that he's going to have to crawl through to get accountability in his case, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't have to be the case. We should we should have a better justice system. We should this is a cry for whatever the case is going to be. There's work to be done. I think both of you and I would be in agreement with that. Policing as it stands now cannot just stay the way it is. The court system cannot just stay the way it is. Right? Media cannot just stay the way it is. We talked about earlier about watershed moment, but this is another case. What are we feeding into the watershed? This is not a time to dial back the flow of interest, of engagement, of a cry for accountability and justice.
Correct.
This is a moment to turn the flow up double. Now is the time to go, all right, keep pressing forward. Don't give up now. Because we can't afford that. How many more people, it's a broken world, yes, but does that mean I have to stick my head in the sand that people are going to keep dying? I want as few people to die as humanly possible. Right?
Absolutely.
That should be our goal. Every life lost is one too many. We've got to figure this out.
Yep. There's one more thing I want to speak to, and I agree with everything you've said. I do. There's one more thing I want to speak to, and it's something that if you are familiar with this conversation in general, there's something known as the 21-foot rule. I don't know if anyone, Henry, I don't know if you know what that is. The 21-foot rule is the distance that an assailant with a knife can cover in the time that it takes an officer to identify a threat or any person
to unholster the weapon,
and fire their gun. The idea being that at some point there are distances, and 21 foot seems like a big distance, but that it's
not
the reaction gap is rule.
At you.
It is, but there are certain distances where, so there are people saying she had a knife, he had a gun, it was unfair, and distance, whatever. There are times where the knife wins. And honestly, if he had tried to unholster his gun when the knife was already back, when she was holding it back, he loses that battle, given that she's already lunging at a person. And
Hollywood makes guns look like some sort of super thing, but guns are really a worthless thing within like 8 feet. By the time you're at that point, a knife, a baseball bat, a lot of these things would be a lot more effective.
Yeah. So I just want to speak to that. I think there are a lot of things where if you're asking, I think the question shouldn't, I don't think we should be tweeting, why couldn't he have shot her in the hand or the leg or whatever, which the ethics there of shooting to maim hits an artery, done anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Now she suffers while she bleeds.
Yeah. Oh, well, you couldn't have, just gotten right neck. You watch John Wick and then you talk about this. It's a completely, you're missing it entirely because John Wick is just, it's Hollywood. It's a bunch of stunt guys coming together to make a movie. And Keanu Reeves is good with firearms.
I know, but folks, there's times where, Hollywood does not understand weapons. Okay. I say this as a gun owner when there's shots where they're shooting like 50 rounds out of a handgun that in real life only holds 8 rounds. And they never do a mag change. It's Hollywood.
Yeah.
They want something to be flashy and fit it all in the 3 seconds for your brain to process, but that's not how it works.
And so this is what I want to say is and this is what I've always hoped. And if anyone's angry with us, I get it. I understand if you completely disagree with what we're saying. I at least in this show have been on the side of on the other side of this. Here I feel like I'm leaning one way, but I know also and understand where my bias is at this point, what I unfortunately want to be true, which is this is another unjust killing. And so I am trying my best to maintain some sort of middle ground to say I want to be open to what evidence continues to pour out. And I've tried to be that way in most other cases too, regardless of what side of I fall on. But if you're angry at us, I get it. I understand it. And I'm open to that dialogue. Leave a comment on YouTube, whatever, and let's have that conversation. I'm here for it. But what I do want to say is this: my goal on this show has always been to at least get us to slow down enough to have a conversation. And if we can just open ourselves up to a little bit more understanding, a tiny bit more empathy, a tiny bit more patience, so that we can actually work through some of these issues through a normal conversation, or at least through, even if it is heated, then I've accomplished my goal on this show, and this show has accomplished that goal for so many listeners. And I've seen that happen time and time again, where people have messaged us, reached out to us, and said it really has changed their approach to conversations and to complex topics. And I'm really grateful when that happens. But I hope that can be true for anyone listening to this episode. I know it's true for both Henry and me that even us talking together has really helped us grow as individuals, and it's helped us grow as friends too. But I hope that I can temper everything that has been talked about with that to say, as this continues to unfold, let's not take our eyes off the Chauvin case, because there may still be calls for justice needed at the end of this, depending on how he's treated and what sentencing is given and all of that.
And the appeals process, yeah.
Yeah, don't take your eyes off the ball. And I think that's going to be the title of this episode, is just don't take your eyes off the ball, because this is a huge mess and we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So, Henry, any final thoughts before I close this out?
I think you summed it up well. As I said, if it's a watershed, water's still got to flow into it. Any life lost is one too many. We live in a broken world. But rather than just throw our hands up in the air and go, well, it's broken, there's nothing we can do about it, especially as people of faith, we are called to lessen the brokenness of this
Absolutely.
world. That's period. That's what we're called to. And we may not know quite how to do it successfully or as effectively it needs to be, but part of that is wrestling with it, having conversations with it, and being transparent and vulnerable in that process. And that's what Ryan and I do in having these conversations, knowing that people will disagree with us. We live in a world where people disagree, and that's perfectly okay. We long to get to a point where people can be uniquely them, feel free to disagree, to grow together, but lives aren't lost in the disagreement. And I think that's part of the challenge we're talking about in these situations. We don't want to have conversations where it gets to varying degrees of escalation, where lives are lost in the end of it, however that looks. So thank you for de-escalating by leaving comments, by having conversations with us, by listening, and let's keep pressing forward to where we have, justice like mighty streams, as the word would say.
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want, go check us out on YouTube. Go check us out on Patreon if you want to support what we're doing. And if you value, if what we do brings value to you, we appreciate any support thrown our way that way. And just give us feedback. Help us keep moving in the right direction, or get back to the right direction if we've somehow gone off track. But we are open to that conversation. And so thank you so much for supporting us, for listening, and giving us your time. It means the world to us, and we'll see you next week.